Welcome to Permission to Breathe, a transformative podcast dedicated to providing a safe space where you can inhale deeply and exhale freely while embracing your grief journey unapologetically. I am your host, Dr. T.I.M, a spiritual practitioner, grief advocate and educator, author, and your guide on this journey through grief. This space was born out of the understanding that grief is not just an event, it's a lifelong unfolding. It's layered, it's complex, and often it's silence. And here is where we disrupt the silence. We will talk about the grief that lingers after the food stops arriving at your door, the grief that remains when no one calls and no one comes by to check on you. The grief that's complicated, the grief that's ancestral, the grief that lives in your body long before it ever reaches your tears. Every episode, we honor the humanity of grief, the anger, the confusion, the numbness, the longing, and we do so without apology. Whether you're navigating fresh loss, unspoken sorrow, or the weight of a world that just won't pause, this podcast invites you to sit down, breathe deeply, and give yourself the permission you've been waiting for to grieve, to feel, to breathe. Let's begin. Are you grieving and feel like you're struggling alone? You don't have to walk this path by yourself. Book a virtual session with Dr. Tammy Isaac at Breathe Grief Counseling Center. Visit us online at www.breathegriefcounselingcenter.com. Dr. Isaac will help you put your emotions into words. She'll help you reduce the feeling of isolation. She'll help you understand that everyone grieves differently and also help you prevent unhealthy coping mechanisms. Take control of your life with world-class counseling sessions today with Dr. Tammy Isaac. Today's episode is titled 50 Shades of Grief, Navigating the Terrain of Grief. Grief is not a straight road. It is a landscape uneven, unpredictable, and filled with valleys, hills, and unexpected turns. When we talk about 50 Shades of Grief, we're talking about the vast terrain that it covers. Grief isn't just one thing. It's a mosaic of emotions, thoughts, and experiences that shift depending on where we are in life and what we've lost. Some shades are dark and heavy, like sorrow, anger, or guilt, and others are softer, like bittersweet memories or quiet moments of peace. And sometimes grief is layered, overlapping, or even contradictory. Just as the terrain of the earth changes with every step, so does the terrain of our grief. This conversation is for anyone who has ever wondered, am I grieving the right way? Or why does my grief look so different from theirs? My hope is that by the end of this episode, you'll not only recognize the many shades of grief in your own life, but also give yourself permission to walk through your unique terrain without shame. So before we dive in, I want to invite you to pause, take a deep breath with me. In whatever terrain of grief you are standing on today, you're not walking it alone. Together, we're going to explore the map, honor the journey, and learn how to navigate its many shades. Let's get started. When most people hear the word grief, the first thought that comes to mind is death, the loss of someone we love. And while that is certainly one of the deepest valleys on the terrain of grief, it's not the only one. Grief has many shades because loss has many forms. We grieve when a marriage ends. We grieve when a friendship changes. We grieve when our health declines, when a dream we once held slipped away, or when life doesn't unfold the way we thought it would. Some of us are grieving the life we expected, the identity we once carried, or the sense of safety we thought would never leave us. This is why I use the phrase 50 Shades of Grief. Because grief is not a single color and not one straight line. It's a spectrum. And that spectrum can look very different depending on who you are, what culture you're a part of, or even what season of life you're in. For some, grief looks like tears and visible sadness, but for others, it looks like silence, holding it all in because you've been taught not to show weakness. In certain cultures, grief is loud, communal, and expressive with wailing and open lament. In others, it is quiet and restrained and dignified. And guess what? Neither is wrong. They are all simply different shades of the same experience. Grief can look different within the same family. One sibling may cry every day after the loss of a parent, while another distracts themselves with work and another finds comfort in humor. Each of them is grieving. Each of them is navigating the terrain, but the paths they walk don't always look the same. What makes grief so complex is that it refuses to stay locked in a box, per se. It spills into our emotions, our bodies, our relationships, and even our faith. It comes in waves, sometimes subtle, other times crashing hard. And because of this, many people wonder, am I doing this right? I want to say to you, there is no right way to grieve. There is only your way. Grief will find its voice through you in the way that makes the most sense for your heart and for your life. Your shade of grief matters. So as we move through this episode, I want you to picture grief like a prism. When light passes through a prism, it refracts into many colors. Each color is beautiful and each one is necessary to make up the full spectrum. The same is true of our grief. Every shade you experience is part of the larger picture of love, loss, and healing. Grief is often painted with one emotional color, sadness. And while sadness is certainly real and deep, it's only one shade in the vast emotional terrain of grief. Let's start with anger. For many people, grief brings a sharp edge of anger. Anger at the unfairness of it all. Anger at doctors or systems that couldn't prevent the loss. Sometimes even anger at the person who died because they left or because their choices may have contributed. And yes, sometimes even anger at God. That anger doesn't make you faithless. It just makes you human. Then there's guilt. Guilt whispers, I should have done more. I should have called sooner. I should have said something different. Guilt convinces us that somehow we could have changed the outcome, even when deep down we know we couldn't. Another shade is relief. And this is one that is hard to talk about. But if you've ever cared for a loved one who suffered long with illness, you may have felt relief when their pain ended. Relief that they no longer suffer. Relief that the caregiving burden has lifted. And then right on the heels of relief comes shame, because society tells us relief is not an acceptable emotion when grieving, but it is. It's one more shade and it has its place in your grief journey. There's also confusion. Grief scrambles our emotions. One minute you're crying, the next you're laughing at a memory, and the next you feel completely numb. People often say, I feel like I'm going crazy, but you're not. You're grieving, and grief does not follow a straight emotional path. I wish it did. Sometimes grief even surprises us with joy. That may sound strange, but joy is often tucked inside of sorrow. Joy is remembering the love you shared, joy in a funny story told at a funeral, joy in realizing you're still here, still carrying their memory forward. What I want you to know is this. These emotional shades of grief are not contradictions. They are companions. You can feel anger, love, guilt, and relief, sadness and joy all at once. Emotions and grief don't cancel each other out. They layer, they overlap, they create a collage that only you can make sense of. If you're listening today and you've wondered, why am I feeling this way? Why don't I just feel sad like I'm supposed to? I want to remind you there is no supposed to in grief. However your emotions show up, they are part of your journey. And giving yourself permission to feel them without judgment is one of the bravest steps that you could ever take in this journey. Grief doesn't just live in our hearts or in our minds. It also shows up in our bodies. And it can leave us feeling drained, like we've been carrying a weight that we can't put down. Many people will notice changes in their sleep, either struggling to fall asleep or waking up in the middle of the night with their thoughts racing. Then there's the appetite shifts. Some people can't eat while others find themselves steady reaching for food as comfort. Grief can also feel like tightness in the chest, shallow breathing, headaches, or even muscle aches. The body literally keeps the score and it remembers. When you've been through deep loss, your body speaks even when your mouth stays silent. And then there's the spiritual layer of grief. For some, loss creates a crack in their faith. They may ask questions like, where was God? Why didn't he intervene? Or how could a loving God allow this to happen? These are very honest questions that are born from the deep ache and absence of their loved one. And then there's others whose grief can deepen their sense of faith, pushing them to cling to scripture, prayer, or rituals that bring comfort. Now, I've sat with people who felt completely abandoned by God, and with others who said they felt God closer than ever in the midst of their pain. Both are real and both are valid. And spiritual grief is its own terrain as well, right? Sometimes grief leaves us with silence, a silence in prayer, a silence in worship, a silence where words used to come easily. And sometimes grief opens new spiritual doors, maybe not answers, but a different way of being present with mystery, with love, and with what can't be explained. Now, however it shows up for you in your body, in your faith, or in your questions, I want you to know this: grief touches every part of who you are. It's not just an emotion. It's an embodied spiritual experience, and giving yourself permission to listen to your body, to wrestle with your questions, and to lean into your faith, or even away from it for a season, can be part of the healing process. When we're standing in the middle of grief, the question that often rises is, how do I survive this? There's no single answer, no magic formula, but there are pathways, ways to steady yourself while walking this unpredictable terrain. One of the first is naming your grief, giving it words, because when you can name what you're feeling, it becomes less overwhelming, less like a storm cloud that's hovering overhead, and more like something you can face. Maybe that looks like journaling each morning, writing down the emotions as they come, raw and unfiltered. And maybe it's writing letters to the one you lost, letters you'll never send, but that carry all the things you still needed to say. And maybe it's simply speaking aloud in an empty room, I miss you, or I'm angry, and even I'm hurting. Naming grief gives it shape. And when grief has shape, it feels a little less like it will swallow you whole. Then there's rituals. So rituals give grief a container when everything else feels uncontained. Like lighting a candle every evening, playing your favorite song, maybe cooking the dish they loved, creating a memory box with pictures and small items that hold meaning. These are acts or may seem small, but they really do anchor us. They remind us that grief is not just about what we've lost. It's also about honoring what we still can carry forward. Then there's community. Community is another lifeline. Grief can make us want to withdraw, to isolate, because it feels like no one else could possibly understand it. But healing often happens in the presence of others. Sometimes it's a support group where everyone in the room nods because they know. And sometimes it's maybe one friend who will sit on the couch with you in silence. Sometimes it's a faith community that holds you up when your strength is gone. We don't heal alone. Despite what people think, we heal in connection. And even if that connection is quiet and simple. Another shade of help is self-compassion. Grief can make us so harsh with ourselves, right? We tell ourselves, I should be over this by now, or I should be stronger. I shouldn't still cry at night. But grief is not a race, right? It's not a sport to champion. There's no finish line, no trophy for getting through it faster. It unfolds in its own time. And the best gift you can give yourself is grace. The same grace you'd give to a friend if they were hurting. Speak to yourself gently and say things like, it's okay. You're allowed to feel this. You're allowed to take your time. And let's not forget the power of stillness, whether that comes through prayer, meditation, deep breathing, or simply sitting outside and letting the wind move across your face. Stillness gives space for your soul to exhale. You don't always need words. Sometimes silence is prayer enough. Sometimes a hand on your heart or whisper, thank you for the memory that makes you smile, is as holy as a sermon. It's as holy as a sermon. It's sacred. It's powerful, right? For some, what helps is seeking professional support. And I'm a big advocate for this. A grief counselor, a chaplain, a therapist, someone who can actually sit with you in the midst, guide you when you feel lost, and also remind you that what you're experiencing is not only valid, but survivable. Asking for help doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're wise enough to know that you weren't created to carry this alone. And also there's the often overlooked permission to experience joy again. So grief can trick us into believing we're not allowed to smile, or laugh, or enjoy life without betraying the one we lost. But laughter doesn't erase love. Joy doesn't cancel out sorrow. They can live side by side. Giving yourself permission to feel joy is not forgetting, guys. It's remembering in a different way. So what helps? Sometimes it's structure, sometimes it's community, sometimes it's silence. But really at the heart of it, what helps is permission. Permission to cry, permission to rest, permission to rage at the unfairness, and permission to laugh at a memory. Permission to grieve in your shade, your pace, your way. Grief rarely comes in a single shade. More often, it's layered, complicated, overlapping, messy, and that's part of what makes it so hard to navigate. Sometimes we're grieving more than one loss at the same time. A person dies, and along with them goes our sense of security, our family traditions, even our future dreams. We don't just grieve who we lost, we grieve what we lost with them. That's overlapping grief. There's also what we call complicated grief. That's when grief feels stuck, when it doesn't ease with time and instead seems to tighten its grips around us. Maybe the death was sudden or traumatic. Maybe the relationship itself was complicated, full of love, yes, but also pain, conflict, and unfinished business. In those cases, grief doesn't move in neat stages. It loops, circles, and sometimes crashes like waves that never seem to calm down ever. I think of families who've experienced back-to-back losses, a parent one year, a sibling the next, a grandparent soon after. Grief then becomes or begins to stack on top of grief, and the weight feels unbearable because it's not one loss, it's many. The terrain becomes rocky, uneven, almost impossible to cross without stumbling. There's there are also times when grief gets tangled with other life realities like chronic illness, financial stress, caregiver responsibilities, or strained relationships. The grief doesn't come alone. It arrives with luggage, right? And when that happens, people often wonder why they can't bounce back the way others seem to. But how could they when grief is not the only weight they're carrying? And then there's traumatic grief, the kind that rewires your nervous system. Losses like suicide, homicide, accidents, these can leave wounds that feel raw for years. The grief isn't only about the loss, it's about the shock, the questions, the trauma stamped into memory. What I want you to hear today in this conversation is that if your grief feels complicated, layered, or overwhelming, that doesn't mean you're failing at grief, okay? It means your grief is telling the truth about the depth of your experience. It means that the terrain you're walking is harder, it's steeper, more jagged, and it is okay to admit you need support for the terrain like that. When I think of it in that way, I'm reminded of people who climb mountains, right? They may be used to climbing mountains. They know it's rough and it's tough. But when you're about to climb mountain like Kilimanjaro, you don't just go and say, I'm going to climb this mountain. But when you go, I've heard that they give you a guide that goes with you to help support you on the climb because it's such a much more extensive and dangerous climb. So sometimes the terrain that we are going through, it warrants having support, somebody to guide and navigate us through the terrain. So support might look like therapy. It might look like joining a grief group with people who've also faced maybe similar losses. It might also mean leaning more deeply into faith or asking hard questions of God without feeling shame about it. It might also mean simply taking smaller steps, right? One day, one breath, one choice at a time. Complicated grief doesn't make you weak. Overlapping grief doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. And it means your love was real, your losses were real, and your story deserves the care and compassion to match that reality. As we come to the end of this conversation, I want to return to the image we started with, 50 Shades of Grief. Grief is not one-dimensional. It's layered, it's textured, it is as vast and varied as the human heart itself. Some days it looks dark and heavy, other days lighter and more bearable. Sometimes it rushes in all at once, other times it lingers quietly in the background. And each of these shades, every single one, is part of the terrain of love. You are not doing grief wrong if it looks different than you expected. You are not failing if your grief is complicated or if joy and sorrow sit side by side in your heart. Your shade of grief matters. And more than that, it tells the story of who and what you've loved. So here's the takeaway I want you to carry. Grief is not something to get over. It's something to walk through. And while the terrain may be uneven, you don't walk it alone. There are companions, faith communities, rituals, memory, love that walk beside you. And as long as you keep breathing, keep allowing space for both the ache and the beauty, you are navigating grief with courage. I want to leave you with a simple practice. Place your hand over your heart. Feel the rhythm that's there. That heartbeat is proof that even in loss, life continues. And with every beat, there is an invitation to keep carrying love forward in your own way, in your own shade, in your own time. Thank you so much for joining me in this episode of Permission to Breathe podcast. If today's conversation spoke to you, I encourage you to share it with someone who may need these words. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss future episodes. Until next time, take a deep breath, honor your grief, and remember, even in the terrain of loss, love always leaves a shade of beauty behind. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Permission to Breathe podcast. I hope today created space for you to breathe and find peace on your journey. I invite you to join me again next Monday for another episode as we continue to navigate this path together. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and to share the podcast. Until next time, take care and keep breathing unapologetically.